What should we do on the weekend? I'm Joseph. This is Input English. Today we have a story. For those of you joining us for the first time, let me introduce these stories. I create these original stories for Comprehensible Input. They showcase useful vocabulary and expressions, and frequently they deal with the day-to-day experiences of people, so the language that you're learning is pertinent to life. Today's video is part of a series of videos about a fictitious family, two boys, Craig and Bobby, and their parents. If you'd like to start with these stories at their beginning, go into our library of videos and search for the video entitled Meet Bobby. That is the first video in this series, and then they follow on chronologically. Now, I try to make each video complete so it can stand alone if you've not seen previous videos. I invite you to peruse the library of videos. There's a lot of content for you on this channel. So let's get started with our story. We find Kathy and Robert in their chairs in the living room reading. It's Wednesday night, the week is half done, and they're both tired. The boys have gone to bed and they are reading and relaxing. Robert had a very good day at work, a very busy day, but nothing out of the ordinary. Kathy, on the other hand, had a rough day, a lot of work in the office in the morning, followed by a court appearance in the afternoon, which she found very stressful. Kathy is an attorney. Robert is reading a book, but Kathy is online looking at the weather. She wants to know what she should plan for the family for the weekend. Because the weather has been a little cold and windy with a lot of rain, they've not had much opportunity to go outside. As she looked at the weather report, she murmured to herself, "False spring." Robert heard her say that in a very low voice and turned to her and said, "What?" And she said, "We're getting a false spring. It's still mid-January, but the weekend is going to be beautiful. It's going to be above 65 degrees with no rain in the forecast." Robert immediately said, "We should get out and do something. We should take advantage of that fine weather." Kathy said, "Exactly." She continued, "Why don't we go to the regional park and take the boys on that nice long hike through the woods that takes us up to the hilltop, the bluff overlooking the river. I can pack us a picnic." Robert smiled and said, "That would be perfect." And then he continued on by speculating that perhaps the new neighbors, Bill and Ginger, might want to come along because they may or may not know about this regional park. They could bring Charlotte. Kathy said that she would contact Ginger the following day to issue the invitation. The following day, Kathy did call Ginger during the mid-morning. She proposed that the two families go on this picnic on Saturday to enjoy the great weather. Ginger explained that she and Bill had a previous commitment and they would not be able to do that. She said that Charlotte would be at home, and I'm sure that Charlotte would enjoy going along on that picnic. I'll check with her. While they were on the phone, Ginger walked to Charlotte's room and posed the question to her as to whether she would like to go on a picnic on Saturday. Charlotte said yes, and the plan was set. Kathy packed a nice picnic lunch. She distributed all these picnic supplies into the 4 backpacks that they would be taking. There was also a small basket that Robert would carry. On Saturday, about 8 o'clock in the morning, they all departed. Charlotte had walked over from her house as planned, and the 5 of them took off to the regional park. It wasn't a long drive, about an hour, and when they got there, they found a parking place and started their hike. The hike took them through some grasslands and then into a forest. The forest had a high canopy and not much low vegetation. It was very open, so they could see very well. This long walk would take them up onto a hilltop, a bluff, that is a cliff that overlooks the river. The view from that bluff is beautiful. They took their time on this walk. There was no hurry. It was not like they were trying to get to a particular destination at a particular time. They were there to enjoy the journey. They stopped frequently to look at small objects and plants, and they gradually made their way through the grasslands and into the forest. In the forest, the terrain gained some altitude. They were climbing, but it wasn't very steep. They stopped a lot, and Kathy offered all the children plenty of water. They didn't want to get dehydrated. At one point, they stopped in a clearing where there was a rock that was shaped kind of like a table. They sat around this boulder and spread out some snacks. They also took plenty of fluids. After their snack, they were refreshed, so they continued on their walk up to the hilltop. It was late morning when they got to the hilltop, and they got a beautiful view of the river and the valley below. Kathy cautioned the children to stay away from the edge of the cliff because someone could fall and be injured, and she didn't want that to happen. After they had explored that hilltop, they decided to go back down and have their picnic in a clearing in the woods that they had identified on the way up. They would get there just before the noon hour. They hiked back down into the woods and made their way to this planned picnic site. It was perfect. Kathy spread out a large blanket for the picnic and then started putting out the various types of food that they would have for their lunch. She had packed a number of sandwiches, lots of fruit, but she had avoided processed food and sugary snacks. She wants to set a good example for these kids in terms of health choices. No potato chips were brought on this walk, but apples were brought, and everybody had an apple. It was when they were finishing up their picnic lunch that Robert caught sight of something near to them in the brush. Something moved. In an instant, he was on his feet, moving toward what he had seen. Kathy and the children were a little startled by his rapid movement away from the picnic and into the brush. They were even more surprised when he reached into the brush and grabbed a large snake and pulled it out of the brush. No one expected that to happen. Having caught this large snake, Robert walked calmly back to the group sitting on the blanket enjoying their picnic lunch. As he arrived, they all stood up to see what he had brought back to their picnic. What he had captured was a large indigo snake. Now this snake, by this time, was coiled around his arm, and it was not possible to estimate how long it was. Robert estimated for them that it was certainly more than 6 feet long and perhaps even 8 feet long. It was large and black. At this point, Kathy's wheels were turning in her head. She was thinking about the propriety of catching a wild animal on a picnic. Wouldn't it be better to just leave it be, leave it in nature and not molest this animal? And then she had an opposing thought come into her head. What a great opportunity for an educational experience for these kids. They can see this magnificent snake up close. They can touch it. Kathy was very conflicted about this. She wasn't sure what the right answer was. She really wanted to leave wild animals alone, but she relished the thought of these children having this rich experience. Robert explained to the other four that this was an indigo snake, an eastern indigo snake, and they are typically 6 feet long when they're adults, perhaps longer. They are constrictors, and they eat small creatures that they find in the woods, rodents, reptiles, amphibians, insects. They are predators. Indigo snakes are very docile. It is rare to be bitten by an indigo snake, and they're non-poisonous, and so the bite, were it to occur, would not be dangerous. Robert was thinking that he had never heard of anyone ever having been bitten by an indigo snake. This is why he felt confident in picking it up. He knew that the snake was very docile and would not strike him. He presented the indigo snake to each of the children so that they could touch it and get a very up-close view of it. The scales were not slimy or slippery. They were very smooth and clean. Each of the children had an opportunity to hold the snake in his or her hands. And of course, no one was harmed. After all of this, Robert explained that it was now time to release the snake back into the wild and let it go on its way. And with that, Robert placed the snake back in the brush within inches of where he had picked it up. The snake quickly slithered away. Later on the drive home, Kathy started a discussion, initially with Robert, but later to include the children. She wanted to discuss whether it was appropriate to capture a wild animal and handle it in that fashion, or would it have been better to leave it alone? She didn't come at this discussion with strong opinions of her own. She merely suggested that there are two ways to look at this. Robert responded that he agreed with her. There are advantages and disadvantages at work here. He reminded her of the television show that Mutual of Omaha aired decades earlier, where a fellow named Marlin Perkins and his sidekick Jim would go out into the wild and capture wildlife to showcase them for learning. The wildlife that these two captured on their television show was frequently not nearly as docile and cooperative as an indigo snake. Robert explained his thought process to everyone in the car. He said, I knew that was an indigo snake when I saw it. I knew it on sight. In the blink of an eye, I knew what it was. With that knowledge, I knew it was docile. I knew I would not be bitten and that no one would be bitten. I knew that if I picked up that snake, it would not react violently, so it would not be injured and we would not be injured. If I had looked at that snake and decided that it perhaps was a poisonous snake, I would have avoided it. I would never have picked up a rattlesnake or a copperhead. No. He went on to explain that very little wildlife in a forest is so docile as an indigo snake. And he could not think of any other type of wildlife that he would feel comfortable capturing and showing to a child. He speculated that perhaps There would be some insects that would fit that bill, but for the most part, the wildlife in the forest needs to be left alone. He advised the children to not just casually pick up snakes. He didn't want that as the take-home message for the kids, that it's okay to just reach over and grab a snake. That can have some very unfortunate consequences. He advised the children to never pick up a snake unless they are a grown-up and they have a lot of knowledge about snakes. It was Bobby who asked him how he knew it was an indigo snake. Robert said, well, there are no other snakes in the woods that are a combination of that size and that color. Those two characteristics mean it's an indigo snake, and there is no other option. If the snake had been much smaller, then there would be other options. If the snake was a different color, then it wasn't going to be an indigo snake. But that combination, those two characteristics, the size and the color, that defined what it was. Bobby was satisfied with that answer. It made sense. Basically, Robert just recognized it on sight. Kathy took this as a great opportunity to get a little bit Socratic with these children. What she did was pose questions to each child about the propriety of capturing a wild animal in the woods. She included Charlotte in this discussion. Each of the kids expressed their feelings that in general they would leave wild animals well enough alone. They viewed this as a unique experience, and they would not choose to imitate this behavior themselves. With this, Kathy was very satisfied that these children had a very mature attitude about wildlife and the need to leave wildlife wild. What do you think about going out into the woods and capturing wild animals for your own entertainment? Is that a reasonable thing to do? I invite comments below. And if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.